Let's get everybody in and sit down. So we can start on time, and that way we can finish on time. Yes. I guess. Get started. I'd like to welcome you to the second David S. Saurman Provocative Lecture for 2016. Thank you all for taking time to join us this evening. My name's Jack Estel, and I'm a lecturer with the Department of Economics here. So this would be an excellent time to pull out your electronic companion and maybe turn it off or put it on stun. There we go. I'd like everyone to join us after this lecture at Flames Restaurant, which is at the corner of 4th and San Fernando. We'll have a meeting of what we call the Barstool Economists. The Barstool Economists is a virtual group of about 400 people who follow economic events and make comments, and everyone is welcome to join. If you haven't joined, it's in Yahoo Groups, and you're welcome to email me, and I will see about getting you on. But even if you're just a prospective member, you can join us at Flames after this for more discussions, and faculty will be there as well as many of the students and our speaker. So please feel free to join us. Let's see. I'd also like to point out that we will have, that's right, we have one more provocative lecture coming up in May. I believe it's Monday, May 9th. Dirk Mateer will be here from the University of Arizona, and he will be talking about the gyrations of the oil market. I think you'll find it interesting. I've heard Dirk speak many times, and in fact, I've had to follow him twice. And it's very, very intimidating. I try not to do that. Every time I get on a schedule with him now, I try and talk first. It's just, anyway, moving on. This lecture series started 16 years ago to foster our vision of higher education, the challenge of ideas, and the development of critical thinking in an environment of respectful intellectual intercourse. I'm sorry, discourse. Yeah. I've got to get that. I don't know, that's a typo, I think. Please relax and listen to Temba. I'm going to get this right. Nolutshungu.
No, from 99% earlier on, it's 98%.
Nolutshungu. So I'd like to welcome Temba here. And so please relax and listen. And he's going to discuss his experiences in South Africa and bringing property rights to township residents who formerly could only rent. This is a fascinating topic. He will also provide a question and answer period at the end of the presentation to allow the audience to ask some specific questions. And it's our hope that this lecture will stimulate a greater understanding of the importance of strong property rights in emerging countries. So before we turn to Temba, I'd also like to introduce Matt Warner, who is the Vice President of Programs at the Atlas Network. And the Atlas Network was really responsible for bringing Temba to us. And I'd like to have him say a few words about his organization.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Just a quick couple of announcements. I really appreciate being here. I appreciate the hospitality. We've already been shown so much. And it's quite a turnout here tonight. So I really commend all of you for your engagement in this important lecture series. And we're honored to play a small role in it. We first started to pay attention to the Free Market Foundation, where your speaker tonight works, quite a long time ago. But As an organization based in D.C., we're always looking for strong examples of the way that people are advancing positive reforms around the world, and we try to learn about them and share those case studies with other organizations. And we do a few different things, and I just wanted to share with you, in case anyone here is interested, we also have some grant opportunities for students and student groups, particularly those who have a passion for some of the ideas that Temba will be talking about tonight, property rights and rule of law and markets. And so if that's of interest to you, please visit atlasnetwork.org. Under our grants page, there's an application there. Catch me afterwards if you have questions about that. I'll give you some more details. And then I also wanted to share with you that we provide a suite of online and in-person training opportunities for people who are interested in careers in think tanks. Part of the fun of the work that we do is there's an entrepreneurial spirit to it. And as people embark on different career courses, we try to provide some opportunities to help them map out some of those opportunities. So you can visit our training page as well. So that's atlasnetwork.org. Ask me afterwards if you have any questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Matt. So, Matt, what is the deadline for your summer programs?
Well, our online opportunities actually go year-round, and then we have some different in-person stuff, actually on 5 or 6 continents a year. So just check it out and see what's relevant to you and your schedule.
Very good. Thank you very much. I'd like to say a few words about our speaker tonight. Temba is the director of the Free Market Foundation of South Africa and serves on several other boards, including the Langa Heritage Foundation, the Helen Suzman Foundation, and the Cape Town Carnival. He's a contemporary of Stephen Biko, and he is a longtime opponent of apartheid and was twice detained and held in solitary confinement. He's written extensively about economic growth and free markets, and you can read more about what he has written at the Free Market Foundation's website, which is readily available at www.freemarketfoundation.com. He is passionate about the work that he's doing, and I'd like to give him a warm welcome. Thank you.
I never like a thunderous applause before the delivery of a speech, and because it means that I have to struggle to rise to occasion. And anyway, let me kick off by saying that I really appreciate the fact that I'm here to address you. And please be assured that I profess not to have a monopoly on knowledge or wisdom. So I'm hoping that in the course of interaction after my upfront presentation, that we're going to have some interaction. You're going to raise some points, if need be, comment from a critical perspective on what I will have said. Having said that, I would advise that you fasten your seat belts, especially those people within the audience who might be very close or associated with government, because I'm going to make a provocative statement. I take no prisoners in the advocacy or defense of individual liberties, economic freedom, free markets. In other words, this is a statement I'm going to make. But before that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring some points that might seem at times not really quite relevant to each other or interlinked. But as I make progress in the presentation, you will find them falling into place and you will see a full picture emerging at the end of the day. So when you come away from the presentation, you will have a very full, cohesive picture that you would look at and you would think, oh, this is what this was about, and so on. Government is not the cure, it is the disease. It is not the cure, it is the disease. It is the private sector, meaning private enterprises, meaning private individuals in pursuit of their socio-economic ambitions who are the cure. It is the government that is the disease. That's a statement. Now I will substantiate the statement in the process of my presentation. Now, just to drive this point home very dramatically, let me just dwell on one example where it is a classic case of the government interfering with the pursuits of an entrepreneur who had done nothing to incur the wrath of the government. This was a Zimbabwean entrepreneur, black entrepreneur in Zimbabwe, who had started out on his own, and their story is captured in a book that bears the title The Forgotten Heroes by Ian Hetherington. He started out this business, and when he had reached a point where this business had started to generate significant returns, incomes, it attracted the attention of what I call the deceiver of revenue, and not the receiver of revenue. He got a letter that said to him, due by you is so much money in the form of tax. You need to pay the tax. And this is how he responded in writing to that letter. He said, I have to refer to the attached form. I regret grave that I am unable to complete the form, as I do not know what is meant by filling this form. However, I am not interested in this income service. Could you please cancel my name in your books, as this system has upset my mind, and I do not know who has registered me as one of your customers. You see, the government, I have said, is the disease. It is not the cure. I'm going to take you back to the challenges that we're faced with in South Africa currently. And you will see throughout that from the British colonial era right up to the present, the government has been doing the wrong things in terms of the impact of policies on black people. And that came to an end to some extent with the democratic dispensation that kicked in with Mandela at the helm in 1994. Going back in history, during the colonial era, the British colonial government adopted a series of legislation that had the objective of nullifying, preventing, and restricting the ownership of property by the natives, meaning the black people who constituted the majority. And this continues to be the case in terms of the majority position of the black people. One of the most pernicious pieces of legislation was the Natives Land Act of 1913. Natives Land Act. Besides that, there was also enacted in 1894 the Glen Grey Act that had almost the same objective and impact. Now, when that act was implemented, and announced on the 19th of June 1913, some of the black activists and champions of the black cause who were engaging the British colonial government on this act, they came up and with the idea of engaging the British colonial government in Britain itself. But their efforts were in vain because all these pieces of legislation were enacted. The most vicious of which, I have to repeat this again, being the Natives Land Act of 1913. This act amounted to the economic emasculation, I tempted to use the word castration, of the black people. And overnight, black people became black capitalists with no capital. In the words of one of the presidents of the Free Market Foundation, blacks they were reduced to a state of being hewers of wood and drawers of water. And in the words of Thomas Hobbes in the book Leviathan, the socio-economic status of the blacks was, to quote him, life was solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. End of the quote. That was the situation. Now, one of the champions against, I've alluded to this, against these vicious pieces of legislation, Mr. Saul Plaatje, he had this to say about the act. He said, awaking on Friday morning, 20th of June 1913, the South African native found himself not actually a slave, but a pariah in the land of his birth. And then another one of his comrades, his colleagues, who was involved in the same organization as the South African Natives National Congress, which is the precursor to the present African Nationalist Congress, which is the incumbent ruling party in South Africa, Mr. Dambuzo, he said, the Natives Land Act breaks our people and puts them back in the rearing of their stock and ruins what they term their bank. It causes our people to be derelicts and helpless. We beg the Commission to approach the government and make our grievance clear and find a haven of refuge for our oppressed. There is winter in the Natives Land Act. In winter, the trees are stripped and leafless. So you have, for 78 years before the abrogation of these pernicious pieces of legislation, black people living under these conditions. And you had a situation, and the rationale behind all these policies was the concern amongst the white population, that sector in South Africa, that the blacks were buying up all the land, that in no time there would be no land, no property left for any of the white people to buy. So that was put to a halt. The other consideration in terms of the rationale was that the white-dominated, white-controlled, white-owned industries wanted the black labor pool. They want blacks to go and work in the various industries outside of the black designated areas, and also to work in the burgeoning mining industry. That was the thinking, the rationale behind the passage of these vicious pieces of legislation. And so, moving forward then, you have 1948, when the apartheid administration kicked in. When it kicked in, what the administration did thenceforth was that it reinforced the existing legislation. It piled up even more segregationist policies. The situation just got progressively worse for black people. And so there was this anger amongst black people, which sometimes you can feel even to this day, because some people have a recollection as to what their grandparents used to tell them life was like. I know that in my case, my grandfather used to own a farm. I didn't know that he used to own a farm. I got to know about that just when he was sick and had been admitted to a mental institution. But one thing that got me to be interested in his own situation as to what had happened to him was the fact that he used to send me to go and buy the Farmer's Weekly, which was a magazine that catered for the agribusiness, the industry. And for me, it didn't make sense. I was young, but I was curious. Farmer's Weekly? For somebody who didn't own a farm, couldn't point out a farm that he had. So it was after my grandfather had died and I was mature and I was raising all these questions. Mama, that's my grandfather. Why this weekly, this Farmer's Weekly magazine? Why was my grandfather reading it all the time? She said, Temba, it's a sad story. He used to own a farm. It was confiscated. He couldn't come to terms that he had lost it. He just couldn't come to terms that he had lost it. And something else. That's one of the reasons that led him into that mental institution. I was angry. This was my grandfather. You know, he had a farm, and he had ideas about the farm in terms of who to bequeath it to. But anyway, let's leave aside the personal story and talk about the broader impact of these policies on black people, and also how the black people have risen to the occasion without any help from the government whatsoever. So you have a situation as a consequence of these policies where the black people, constituting over 70% of the population, did not own any property at all, and the houses that they were living in were owned by the government at national, provincial, local, municipal government level as the landlords. Imagine this. Have this picture in your mind. Over 70% of the population were not allowed to own any property throughout the whole country. Throughout the whole country. Now, Mandela was released, and all these laws were abrogated in 1991. However, the current situation as it prevails at the moment is that we have a situation, despite the fact that quite a number of black people own their properties, the situation is that between 5 and 7 million people do not own, households, not people, households do not own the property that they have been living in for generations. Now, because these properties were owned by the government at various levels, as I have pointed out, you had a situation where the people, from generation to generation, bear in mind this was from 1913, the rent being paid for generation and generation. Then comes in what? The Free Market Foundation. With the KLM, which means my house, my home. You might understand that is to mean my home is my castle. It is a property titling project that we came up with. And we said, now, what is the single most important thing that the Free Market Foundation could do in order to redress the past wrongs, the wounded people, and all these sufferings, and something that would act as a catalyst for the economic self-empowerment of families, individuals, and we homed in on this project. What this amounts to is that we look at this property. Remember, it's owned by the government, which is the landlord, at various levels of government. And we said to the government, you have in your books, in terms of who the legitimate people are who occupy these houses, these properties and so on. Now, what we want you to do, that's all we needed to do. Because we're always conscious of the fact that the government is the disease and not the cure. We said, all we want you to do is just give us the list, hand over the list to us. Let us know who the legitimate occupants of these various properties are. And then what we will do as the Free Market Foundation is that we will go out of our way to seek sponsorship from the private sector and individuals. And so for what? For the process of conveyancing these properties, so that at the end of the day, people have these freehold, unencumbered title deeds. And so this is what the KLM, My House, My Home project is about. So we went out there. We were able to get sponsorship. We're moving fast on this. We feel so fired about this. And for us, it is such a burning cause. And when we explain to the potential sponsors that we cultivate, the penny drops and they realize this is a good project. And so if there are any business people within this audience who might have deep pockets, I would prevail on them to consider contributing towards the sponsorship of some of these units. Let me explain something here that's very, very important. Now, those of you who may have read the book, The Mystery of Capital by Hernando de Soto, you know that he talks about dead capital, meaning property that is not legally registered, that is not legally titled. He says it is dead insignificant in economic terms. It is not an asset at all. But once at the stroke of a pen, you are able to get that property to be registered in the form of a freehold unencumbered title deed. Then, by virtue of that, overnight, it becomes active capital. It becomes an economic asset. This is the important thing for us to bear in mind. So you have a family, you have a couple, you have an individual who now holds a freehold title deed. It is legal. It translates into part of the economy. It is part of the economy. And so with a contribution as a conveyancing fee of $150, the conveyancing process takes place and is finished. Now the impact of that $150 is that those properties in an area that we've primarily targeted to be fully titled, a village, poor community that we've targeted, we have been able to ascertain the value of generally all those properties there. And they amount to $6,600. Now, before the person gets the property converted into a title deed, it's not worth anything. It has no monetary value whatsoever, no economic value. But the $150 translates into a $6,600. That's the beauty, the magic of this. Let me talk more about what happens in terms of this having a catalytic effect. Now, the logic of property ownership, private property ownership, is amazing. Because you take a second look, what it is registered in your name. And you want to see that property appreciating over time. And one of your endeavors, socio-economic endeavors, I directed primarily towards achieving that goal. And so what we find in areas where this project has been implemented is that now the family decides to pool their resources together. So the parents, the children, those who don't work, they go to look for work. Those who are working, they work overtime. And they bring the money in and they start purchasing building materials. So it's the building materials. It takes a while. Then afterwards, they check with their builder. How much are you going to charge us for building this house, adding another room? These are the ideas that we have in mind. And so they write down that, children, let's go on and work again. So it doesn't happen overnight, but it happens within a reasonably short period of time. And as you will see, as what has happened in the Tumahole Township, the village. So what happens in the process? Now the invisible hand that Adam Smith talked about, this phenomenon, it kicks in. And so who is hired towards enhancing the value of the property? It is bricklayers, it is plasterers, it is carpenters, it is plumbers, it is welders who make the gates, who make the burglar bars. It's all sorts of economic activities that are catalyzed by just one simple fact. And that is a tenancy-based property being converted into a full property, freehold title deed. That's what catalyzes. It's amazing what happens. And this happens without the government being involved whatsoever. And this happens, there are no government policies that are in place, that are at work. There are no minimum wages, nothing whatsoever. And so the people who are bricklayers, they bring along people who are low-skilled, unskilled, and so on. They negotiate, we're going to pay you at this rate and so on. It's mutually agreed upon, and everybody works. And so, like with all these other artisans, they engage people on that basis. Mutually acceptable terms, no written contracts in many, many cases. My word is my bond kind of manifestation of things. It's wonderful how people really, really stick to this and things really, really happen. And so the house expands. And in some cases, entire structures are demolished. And like the phoenix rising out of the ashes, there is a double-story house that's being built. And after some time, maybe 3 years, it is finished. Once the construction has been done, there is so much satisfaction. There is so much appreciation of what has been achieved. You know, something else that's very important in financial, monetary investment terms. They don't owe any bank any cent. There hasn't been involved in the process Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. It has all been the private sector. It's been the communities, the governments not having been involved whatsoever. And here you've seen how you've had a situation where the people are involved in the wealth creation process. That's not directed by any government agency. It's all happening spontaneously. And people driven by their own enlightened self-interest, looking after themselves, they're able to benefit the others out there. Now the government is not involved, and we insist on the government not being involved in the cases where we implement this project, because we know that the visible, blundering, interfering foot of government will just mess things up. So we don't want that visible foot of government to be involved. We want that invisible hand of Adam Smith that he had alluded to be at play yet. That is the situation. Now, you're going to see some pictures. You may have seen some of these pictures on the screen then. Now, they show various people who are all part of the Tumahole village. There is a lady there that you may have observed who's quite elderly. And she was 99 when she received the title deed. And she was sponsored by a white lady who appears with her in one of the pictures there. And this lady, it was one-on-one, transferred from this lady to the other lady and so on. And Mrs. Motupi, 99 years of age, when she received her title deed, she was asked to comment. So there were reporters, because this was a formal, official, ceremonial handing over event of the title deeds from those people contributing, the sponsors, to contributing to those who were receiving them. And so Mrs. Matupi was asked, "How do you feel?" She was in tears. She said, "At last, I know. This is mine. It belongs to me. It can never be taken from me again. I know I can give it to my children and all my great-grandchildren or their children. No government can ever take it from me because I now have this title deed." And so there is another picture there that shows, that features Mrs. Matupi with her white sponsor. And the occasion was when she turned 100 this year. The two of them are cutting the cake, and they are so happy. If you had seen when they met for the first time, it was a weepy, emotional occasion that got all of us to be in tears. It was also a time of joy, a time of pride. Now, I come from the black consciousness background. Now, in terms of the black consciousness background, the way that we understood it and the way that we advocated it, the way that we were espousing, black consciousness-oriented ideas, sentiments, and so on, Steve Biko being my contemporary, it was not on a discriminatory basis. It was not on the basis that the government aspired to a new government in the context of a democratic dispensation to look after black people paternistically. No, we didn't. We didn't entertain that. And for us, it was a case of we wanted to compete on an equal basis against everybody else. Now, because apartheid was discriminating against black people, we said, no, don't discriminate. Just open up all the various spheres of human endeavor and for everybody to compete equally. And so for me, when I saw Mrs. Motupi and all these other people feeling so proud, it resonated with me. It took me back to those times. And I said, Steve Biko, if you were alive, and I would say to you, look at these people. They're so happy. There is pride, black pride. These were not people who were on their knees and begging for government handouts or anything. There was pride in these people. So this is what the project is about. Now, I want to say something about Mandela, because Mandela, it has come to my notice, I've observed this, is not well known about the fact that he ultimately, whilst he was still president, subscribed, embraced the paradigm of free markets, of individual liberty. I've seen that in South Africa itself, even amongst politicians, even especially within the ANC, his own party, that they didn't, some of them wanted to accept that Mandela was a free marketeer, that he had embraced the free markets. And so, posthumously, I know that Mandela endorses the Kailam project. I know that he endorses it on the basis that it is the single most crucial measure that is informed by markets, the free market paradigm, that can really and will address the socio-economic challenges being faced in South Africa. With that in mind, I'm going to cite what Mandela said. Mandela said, "It is not a question any longer about whether the world embraces a free market economy. The globalized world in which we live has made it imperative that we open our markets both internally and to the outside world. The free market is not merely an American export. It is the acknowledged route for economies all over the world. Closed economies, closed markets, and command economies are self-evidently inappropriate for our times." Will somebody convey this message to somebody by the name of Bernie Sanders, please? Please try to get him to understand. Try to get Mr. Bernie Sanders to understand that when he talks about profit, that it is not a four-letter word in a literal or figurative sense. Profits just simply mean the difference between the cost of production and the revenue from production, and that is it. If you're a business person, that's what you monitor all the time. Am I making a profit? Is this sustainable? I'm exposed to other competitors within the industry who are competing with me and so on. And everybody that's involved in this enterprise has to pull up their socks, like we operate as a team and so on, in the face of all this competitive situation in this environment and so on. Please, somebody convey that message to Mr. Bernie Sanders so that he understands. And the thing is, sorry, I'm not being personal when it comes to Mr. Bernie Sanders, but I know that it comes from the socialistic paradigm. But here, I'm emphasizing a point. I'm emphasizing a principle, because he's very vocal in terms of his animosity to free markets, and that's Mr. Bernie Sanders. Now the point is, when I look and study about what many, many wise people had said before, and I look at some of the very interventionist policies that are being advocated by various players across the political spectrum, I am amazed, because the Greek philosopher Aristotle, for example, if you were to think about Thomas Piketty, who everybody seems to be falling behind on the basis of income inequalities will result ultimately in in class tensions and so on, and cause all sorts of violence. It's an objectionable sort of thing and so on. I think of a Greek philosopher, Aristotle, who lived between 384 and 322 BC. And this is what he said. He said, "It is the greatest inequality for unequal things to be made equal." That was BC. That's what he said. And then I move on to 1680, where a mercantilist prime minister who had been appointed by King Louis XIV, he had summoned a group of merchants. And he said to them, "Look, what can the state do?" Remember, the state at the time was King Louis himself. He was a dictator, right? And the prime minister had been appointed by the royalty. But anyway, because there were shortages in terms of the basic products that were needed in the country. So here's his Prime Minister, Jean-Paul Baptiste. He says to this group of merchants, "What can the state do in order to help you so that you can produce more? There'll be no shortages of goods or that people want." You know what the merchants said to him? They said in French, "Laissez-nous faire, leave us be." In other words, leave us alone. That was 1680. Still, the governments to this day do not get it. They don't get it. They want to direct productivity. They want to control, manipulate, direct, and manage the private sector. They come up with ideas of price fixing. No, these companies, enterprises are making too much money. They're greedy. They're ripping off people. They're exploiting people all of the time. They keep saying that. But the point is, that's where they miss the boat, because at the end of the day, the reality is, it is the private sector. Private sector does not mean only just businesses. It means individuals in their individual pursuits of their socio-economic goals. That it is these people who create wealth. Government does not create wealth. Government consumes wealth. The wealth is created by the people, and that is it, and nothing else. And maybe at this point, I see Jack keeps looking at his time, and I don't want you to be too bored, and so maybe at this point I should just abruptly pause and invite questions, comments, whatever the case might be. Is that okay with you, Bob?
It's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Should we run your pictures for you?
Oh, the picture's back?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Let me just explain. There are 2 or 3 slides that I didn't explain about, and just bring them on, if you will bear with me, please. Now, the one before that, okay, that's another guy a younger version of myself. Now, that is Mrs. Motupi. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that is Mrs. Motupi. Okay. Wonderful lady who had sponsored her. And they are the best of friends. Oh, she goes to visit and sees her, and they talk and they have tea. It's beautiful to watch. It's a microcosm of the Rainbow Nation that Mandela was talking about. And who's spoiling it? It is the politicians. Oh, these damn politicians. They always mess things up. They always do all the time. Why can't they leave people alone to their own devices? And then people will just get along, and they will hire people in their businesses who they think will actually contribute to the productivity and success and efficiency of the business. Why don't they leave people alone? So anyway, sometimes I get angry because the politicians are very good at deflecting attention from themselves, and they blame the greedy capitalists. Most things that are wrong in any country Be it the fact that you might have high unemployment rates or crime, whatever the case might be, it all has to do with the fact that it's a consequence of government policy. I'm going to leave you with that bone to chew on. Think about it, and think around it, and see what else you can identify that you could attribute directly to government. Next slide, please. This other woman here, she was so overwhelmed with joy. She was in tears. She was asked, what do you feel about the fact that you've just got your title deed now? I can't talk. Can't talk. Captured in that mood right at the time. I might as well tell you at the same time that there was one elderly person there, a gentleman. And what he said was, look, now, Temba, I will go to my grandfather's grave and I will clean it up. And I will say to my grandfather, Grandfather, weep no more. It is okay now. The house is here. It is ours. Don't be angry anymore. Weep no more. That's what he said. He was part of that event where he was one of the recipients of the title deeds. Another slide, please, Jack. Now, why I featured this group of children, you see, you can tell that they are at preparatory school level, crèche level. They are from that village. And when you look at them, it used to be one of the poorest of villages, but changes happened. There was transformation economically. And so, for me, nothing does justice to the fact of what that community has achieved than to look at all those children. You look at them, they're beautiful kids. They are plump around the faces. They look healthy. And it took a long time to get them to pose for that picture because they are so energetic. They are so well fed. And it was really a challenge to put them together. It was like herding cats. But anyway, there they were. Now, why also? Another reason why I've got that slide, it is because I have what I call the Temba, Nolutshungu call it the Temba index of socio-economic quality or socio-economic life, or quality of life, and so on. And my advice to you would be, if you're going to any country that you may never have been to, ignore the statistics for a while. You may look at them later on. The statistics that pertain to, say, the health, welfare of the population and the longevity of the population generally, and the education standards and everything that goes into explaining a good life. All you do is you look around and look at children. If you find that generally the children have supple, round, healthy limbs, even when they might not be wearing shoes, that tells you that they are being well looked after. It tells you that there is income that's being earned within that community. It tells you that there is income that is being generated in that community. And so, for example, in Tumahole, all these various small businesses that got underway as a result of just that one act of property titling account for the fact that you have children who look like this. And so you go to any other country, if you look around any place, any community, if you find the children are emaciated, that tells you there's something that is seriously wrong in that community. And so in South Africa, present-day South Africa, despite the fact that we have an unemployment situation, a cataclysm, that is unacceptable, of above 36%. Yeah. Now, 70% of that sector of unemployed people being people who are younger than 35, it has a potentially explosive possibility. Anything can happen. Anything can happen there. But the point is, you would think, based on those statistics, that if you went to any of the poor townships, black designated areas, and to Maholi, you would find all these children with emaciated limbs and so on. You don't find that. And that is because, I repeat this point, what has happened is that there have been businesses that have been set up in those areas, within those areas. And so you have catering services, you have sort of informal restaurants that operate there and so on. And that explains the fact that you see such children. Maybe the next slide will be the last one, or second last one. Yeah! If you look at this one, this was before we implemented, this one. This was in 2010. The headline reads, Angry Gogos stage sit-in bid to get title deeds. Now, these people were not agitated by us to go out and demonstrate. We never told them anything. No, they never attended any Economics 101 lecture. But somehow they knew instinctively that if you have a title deed, it means something to you in economic terms. And it also means legally and politically. It cannot be taken away from you. And hence they were demonstrating, and I'm going to read exactly as it is. We demand our title deed, they should have said this, which is what is so beautiful about it. You know, when people make grammatical spelling mistakes, it actually comes across as being genuine. It is genuine. It's written by these elderly women. They are so sweet. Not sweet, very angry. You can see that one. Oh, gosh, that's good. Now, we demand our title deed from 1982 to 2010 World Cup. We are sick and tired to stay in the darkness. These are these women. Now, this encapsulates the importance of a project like this one, the Kailam Property Titling Project. Kailam, my house, my home. The next slide, I think it's going to be the last one. 2 more slides. Now, here, you're seeing this couple. This is, go back to that slide again, Jack. You see this couple there? That is the house that they've been living in, which has been occupied by generations and generations of the family. So over time, they had accumulated that building material and put it there and didn't want to do anything, didn't want to proceed from that point onwards. Because why? They said, what's the point of making improvements on the building, on the property, when you are not sure whether it's going to be taken from you? If we could have a document that would say it cannot be touched, it belongs to us, then we would start building. So the Kailicha project kicks in, and we said, we found a sponsor for you. They couldn't afford it. And you can tell from the art, you're talking about people who are more or less not really that wealthy, so to speak. And so the sponsorship kicked in, and lo and behold, what happened? Next slide. That's what happened. A transformation from the other house to this. To this. No government involvement whatsoever. Nothing. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things. I'm loath to use the term ordinary. How can you say people achieve so much? How can you call them ordinary? There's nothing really ordinary about such. But nevertheless, they achieve extraordinary things. And I think that's the last one of the slides. Let's just see. Oh, this is another elderly lady. Now, most of the recipients at this time tend to be the mature sort of people. Right? And so they have a recollection as to what happened from 1913 onwards. And hence they are so weepy at the end of the day when that precious document lands in their hands. They are so weepy. They are so excited, so overjoyed, so overwhelmed. That is what this project is about. And on that note, questions, comments, whatever.
This, as we have in the past, if you'll hold your hand up, I'm happy to walk the microphone over to you. And if you keep your hand up, I'll look for the next person who wants to ask a question. Okay. There, and then I'll come back. you have a question? Okay.
So you mentioned that couple right there that once they got, was it the title deed to their property, that they renovated their home and actually invested in it? What was it that caused that change that you had mentioned?
Okay, you're asking about the document that
Did-
is in the hands of one of these people?
This couple right here, yes.
Okay. You're asking about that document.
Right. Well, what I'm saying is what caused the authorities to hand over that document? So I'm
I
assuming
see.
before they were withholding
No,
it, right?
it was not the authorities.
It was not.
It was by virtue of the work of the Free Market Foundation, the project, Kailan project, with the authorities, meaning the government, who owned the property, remember? And with these people, having occupied this place, the families for generations, we said to the government, liberate this property from your greedy, clutching hands. Though we didn't put it in those terms. We are quite diplomatic in a way, sort of persuasive. We said, please, this is going to lead to the self-empowerment of these people. Not the sort of empowerment that one talks about, especially the politicians and so on. Empowering means that you do nothing and I give something to you and you call that empowerment. But it's a process of self-empowerment. So we said to them, it's in your interest that you do that. That's how we sold it to them, because then they will not forget the fact that, the government actually handed over these houses to us. Now, the involvement of the Free Market Foundation is in terms of the conveyancing process, for which the fee was $150, is $550, and that was our involvement as the Free Market Foundation. Now the thing is, the government said, no, people have got to pay and so on. Said, remember, these same houses have been occupied by generations of families who have been paying rent to you, government, as the landlord. So just simply hand them over. So that's what's been happening. It's taken us a long time to get to that point, because government always wants to have a captive constituency that's going to always look up to them all the time, because they think that's going to translate into votes. So I'm talking as somebody who understands the political dynamics of some situations and so on. Governments don't want to let go of things. They don't want to.
So I guess now I'm interested in, are you guys extending help or inspiring other groups in surrounding countries or in other parts of the world? Because it sounds like what you guys are doing is really great and well needed.
Yeah, thank you very much about that, for raising that point. And yes, what we've got in place, because of our experiences and also the expertise that we've accumulated in the process of the Kailan project being implemented in Tumahole. We have in place a Kailan property titling template that can be easily replicated in other countries. However, we have not embarked on that basis as yet, though we have sold the ideas to some of the think tanks that are market-oriented. You don't want to sell that to some think tanks that might be close to government and advocating state-reduced interventionist policies, because they can just mess things up, And so we have not actually started on that in terms of broadening this out. But some think tanks and some individuals, and they know what is going on, and some of them are adapting this template to their own situations. It has yet to get to a point where they actually get it implemented in their countries.
You mentioned something about minimum wage laws. Are minimum wage laws in effect in South Africa? I don't know if you know, but here in California, our governor just recently signed legislation to increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And I know historically that has come down a lot harder on minorities and immigrants. South Africa, were minimum wage laws invoked, and was that part of the high unemployment in South Africa?
Yeah, we have had minimum wages in a few sectors, like, for example, the domestics sector, where you have people who work in private homes and so on. But in terms of its implementation and enforcement, that has occurred outside of the black designated areas. I'm going to explain to you why. Because the thing is, now if you're looking at the black communities with all the businesses that operate in those areas, you are talking about nothing short of a free market by default, and not by design. It's a spontaneous order. Now the thing is, if the government were to enforce minimum wages for domestics in the townships, it would have a political hot potato on its hands. Because one of the things that would happen is that there would be a political backlash. Why do you want to run my home? I've checked this out, randomly with some households. If this were to happen, what do you do? No, I can't allow the government to run my home. Whoever I employ within the context of my household, that's my business. It's got nothing to do with government. And of course, let us say the government was stubborn, actually reinforce that ruthlessly, whatever the consequences. What would happen is, so the husband would say, let's do this. We get rid of this child woman, this domestic employee. And I'll do the washing. I don't like to do the dishes. Could you attend to the dishes? And okay, you clean the house and so on. There will be a division of labor. And who would the casualties be? It would be those low-skilled and unskilled people, because they are the first people to be got rid of and the last people to be considered for employment. And that's because when people look at them, they look at the least, this sounds ruthless, the least desirable sector within the labor market because of the low skills profile of that sector. And in some cases, just having no skills whatsoever. So when you enact, which is what has been happening in this country, minimum wages, there are those casualties that occur. Now, politicians, they will not tell you how many people have lost their jobs as a result of the implementation of minimum wages. They will not. And so some of us don't really care that much as to how many. Because the thing is, when something gets lost in statistics, so my unemployment rate is now from 36%, it is now 40% or whatever, so on. It seems like it's an abstract sort of statistic. That's what it is. And one is reminded of what Stalin said when he said that 1 million deaths, one death is a tragedy, 1 million deaths is a statistic. So there is that kind of sort of mindset, that sort of, when people think about, in statistical terms, what the unemployment rate is. Well, it's 30%. Oh, it's gone up now to 31. Oh, it's now 41 and so on. You don't actually envisage people who are struggling to put bread on the table. You don't realize that there are people who are low skilled, for whom low wages is the entry level because they don't have skills, entry level in the labor market. So you just think, 30% people have lost their, are not employed and so on kind of thing. It's a statistic. It is abstract. It doesn't really register any real meaning in terms of now you have people. You have those who the labor aristocracy, organized labor, has been looking after very, very, very well. And this labor aristocracy is not concerned in terms of the big picture, where you have all these unemployed people who want in. And so they're good at looking after those who will survive the onslaught of minimum wages, and they don't care about those who are going to be casualties. And those people suffer. And these are the people who, Joan Robbins, I think this was in 1962 or 1963, an economist, when she said words to the effect, I hope I can remember what she had said. The misery of being exploited by capitalists is nothing worse than not being exploited at all. She had said that. It's a case of, I need at least half a loaf of bread than not earning a loaf of bread. Now, what happens is, the socialist Neanderthals in my country. And I think this is the case also with your country here, is they say if you don't have a labor market policy scenario that protects those who are employed from being exploited, then you are going to have a free-for-all where these greedy, insensitive capitalists are going to exploit everybody. And then my response to that is, look, the thing is, if you have all these protectionist sort of policies in place that protect those who have been embraced by the labor aristocracy, organized labor, you're leaving all these others to languish in misery, and they fall into this hopeless abyss of where they lose self-respect, they lose their self-esteem, and the men are most afflicted in the process because you as a man across all cultures, you take it upon yourself that your primary role in the context of a household, the family, is to protect the family members, especially the women. It is to provide for the family. Now you're out of work, and maybe your wife is working, so you take it out on her at some point. Oh, you're being arrogant now. You're answering back the way you're doing because you are the one who's earning, the income for the home and so on. And this has happened. So it's been very, very, very disruptive to implement a minimum wage law in any industry. Now, South Africa is being threatened by the imminent implementation of a national minimum wage. It's going to be disastrous. It's going to be disastrous. And the other thing is, the private sector people generally tend to be very scared of government, especially businesses, because businesses feel vulnerable in that the government might retaliate by coming up with punitive regulations. And so they never write to the government, by the way, sir, I'm sorry to announce that I've had to get rid of so many people in my business as a result of the imposition of the minimum wage. They don't do that. Instead, tail between the legs, especially in South Africa, they just keep quiet, and all these people lose their jobs all the time. You see, we're living all our destiny and fate in the hands of policymakers. And I always think to myself, I can't understand how people can do this. I really can't. This is not about trying to influence, how you're going to vote in terms of the presidential elections and so on. I think about the people who are in government, who are in charge of our destinies. Something comes to mind, and that is the fact that once upon a time you had a vice president who mistook a friend for a bird, and he shot at him. He shot at him. Now, that's the kind of person who decides what is going to happen to you. So they enact all these policies. Oh, come on! Why? I once said a while ago, when this was in New York State University, and with students, I went past a street vendor who was selling ice cream. And this guy was there in the morning. And he cleaned up. And I looked at him. And I thought to myself, and this I shared with some of the students at the end of my presentation, I said, you know what? Ask that guy who had mistaken his friend for a bird, or any of the other guys in any of the political parties, to run that business profitably. They would not be able to run it. And even if you are asking them and saying to them, please run it at a loss, I don't think they'd be able to achieve that at all. Yeah. Questions? Well, you ask a question. Okay, you.
So you mentioned something when I was listening. You said that there was no money was owed to any banks. But I'm curious, like the kind of the structure of the sponsorship, because in a lot, especially, and this is a newer thing, what we call micro banking, where it's like smaller kind of loans. Was the sponsorship kind of similar, where since it wasn't contractual promises, it was word by you have my word. The old adage of promising. Was it? That's how the sponsors or paid back? Because I'm a little confused of how that kind of dynamic worked out.
That sounds more like a comment or way of enlightening me than a question. Please, I'd like to home in on the question itself. It's very interesting what you're saying. That's why I'm saying that. But please make it a bit more focused so I can respond to it directly. I'm sorry to have to ask you to do this.
My question is, how is the sponsorships done internally, and how is it so that there was no banking involved? That's my question.
Okay, I get you. Now, the way the sponsorship works is that now I'm providing the details. So we've identified the sponsor for the unit that's going to be sponsored, right? And then so the sponsorship has been secured $150. And so what we do is we go to the conveyancing firm. We say to them, look, it is your professional work to conveyance, titles, and at the end of the day, for people to have title deeds. So we've been motivating you, and we've got you down to a point where you are charging less than 1/3 of the standard fee. So they accept that. Those firms that we collaborate with operate with us on that basis. So they are the ones who work through that. Now, so that money, 150, as it is, it goes directly to them. There are no kickbacks for the Free Market Foundation. It is a project that we feel so good about. And so the spin-off from that is that it somehow cultivates the other potential supporters of the broader Free Market Foundation's brief and advocacy work. It softens them up to be receptive to when we approach them for funding in terms of the general policy work that we do. So the money is with the lawyers, and so they have delivered the title deed, and that's the end of the story. And we hold this event where the title deeds are eventually handed over to the recipients. Does that deal with the point that you are asking? Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Okay, so I wanted to bring up when you brought up the whole ice cream, the vendor, and have the government run it, it wouldn't be profitable. Well, I'm from a country which socialism was actually implemented, and apparently, do you have to say it's because of, say, socialist policies in India under Nehru or under Indira Gandhi that pretty much got India into a cycle of poverty? And well, even though India is developing now, but I'm just saying, how do the policies of socialism, like say under Nehru or Indira Gandhi, how did they affect India's economy in terms of their growth? Is it no incentives or no businesses to invest or?
Yeah, I think you've answered the question yourself, but let me elaborate further on that. That's very, very good, because that means you've been investigating the situation, you've been studying it, you've been researching it. That's what I'm getting from you. However, let's talk about socialism. The one thing that is so impoverishing about socialism is the fact that, in the absence of incentives. First of all, let me just talk about when I went to Prague in 1991 and then proceeded on to Moscow in the same year from Prague. And I wanted to see for myself what had happened as a result of socialist policies, communism having been implemented over many, many years. Now, some of the people that I met with, when I would ask them, what went wrong? Just a basic question. And they would say, I know one other person who I got to know that had been a member of the nomenclatura class. That was the elite class being part of the Communist Party leadership that really, to whom all the benefits accrued. The rest of the population, almost nothing. And this guy said to me, no, socialism, The government pretended to employ people, and the people pretended to work. That's what he said. That's what he said. And so what that meant was just simply what you have implicitly alluded to. In the absence of any incentives to work, you will tend to be disinclined to work productively or efficiently. Because the point is, it's in human nature that, driven by your self-interest, looking after self does not mean that occurs at the expense of other people. No, it doesn't. Now, when you look after yourselves and you're coming to university, you know that ultimately, when I've graduated, possibly I'm going to get this job, I'm going to get that job. You're not doing that just to be good to your neighbors and so on. I will plow back into the neighborhood and so on what I will have reaped as a result of my years of hard work studying here at university. You're acting in your own self-interest. Now, in any enterprise sort of situation where you are employed, if you feel, or where you are running a business yourself, you're a business owner, if you feel that the fruits of your labor, of your hard work, do not accrue to you the way that they ought to, you are going to be demotivated. And so the productivity will decline. And so you'll find the employees being demotivated because, look, the thing is, and the other thing, being paid equally as well, that's another sort of, Marxist sort of doctrine, dogma, principle. I'm a congenital jackass, I'm hypothesizing. You are a hard worker. We're working for the same firm. You work hard. I don't give a damn. I just pretend to be working hard, right? Now, I get paid equal to what you are getting. So your productivity, your earnings are not commensurate with your productivity. It's like you're being punished for being productive, for being more efficient than this guy over here. And so what happens in terms of human nature? You're going to be demotivated. You're going to say, oh, stuff it. That's your problem, right? So then you'll end up being like me. And all of us working here will end up being like myself. That's the reality. That lies at the core of the failure of the socialist systems. Now, good intentions do not necessarily translate into good results. That is what people should have understood. Marx's basic failure, the inherent failure of the socialist school of thought was the fact that it did not recognize human nature. And hence you had these ideas of, we're going to make the new man, like this guy, your neighbor, Fidel Castro used to say. Like in all these socialist countries, they would say, no, there's going to be a new man who's going to be utterly selfless and so on. Rubbish! Because the people who acted like ordinary human beings were the nomenclatura class, those members of the Communist Party high up there. And they were the ones who had access to all the shops for goods and services and so on. When I was in Russia, in Moscow, sorry for taking too much time, and I had the good fortune of hiring the services of a driver who had collected me at the airport and took me to the hotel. And I said, can you speak English? He could speak a smattering of English, and that was good enough. And so I am with this guy, and I said to him, look, I want you to take me around Moscow. So we're moving around. That was when there was only one McDonald's facility in Moscow, throughout the whole of Moscow. That was 1991. And the queue, it was around blocks and blocks of building. But anyway, I was saying to this guy, who was my driver and also who was doing the interpretation for me, I said to him, there's something that I'd like you to explain to, that I'd like to see. I want to see if there isn't any private sector businesses that people are starting right now, maybe selling flowers, maybe selling food or whatever. So he says, I'm going to take you around. So we went to an informal pocket of business activity. And there was a truck driver there. And from the back of his truck, he was selling loaves of bread. And they were very crude loaves of bread. But they smelled fresh. And so he was charging, let us say, for example, I can't remember the exact amount, say 10 rubles. Now, the following day, we went there. I said, I want to see what's going to happen here. And the queue for the bread, same bread, grew longer. And this guy charged more than the 10 rubles that he had charged the previous day. On the third day, it was the same story. More rubles being charged. And I said, when he had sold out all these bread, I said, I want you to ask the driver why he is so cruel as to keep on raising his prices all the time. It is the same loaf of bread. Nothing has changed. Why is he so insensitive? Why is he so cruel? So the driver scratches his head and he says, you know what? I don't know, but I find myself doing it. That's what he said to me. Now, the thing about that is that, you see, the free market, it is a spontaneous order. It reflects human nature. That is why the free market delivers. It delivers because it is compatible with human nature. And for me, that was a dramatic illustration of that. And just the one last thing about Moscow. So at some point, I'm standing with this guy, and somebody comes along. He says, boxer. Because he was thinking I was a boxer, maybe from the U.S. by virtue of my being black and so on. But anyway, so he tries to get a conversation going. And so we're trying to get each other understood and so on. You know, as I turn around, there's a queue behind me of about 50 people. Hey, I ask my friend, what's going on? He says, no, in Moscow, if you see, say, 3 or more people, the assumption is that they are waiting outside for some goods that are going to be delivered. And so to play it safe, you fall in the queue. And I said, do you know at least what is going to be delivered? We don't know. Sometimes you think it's going to be vegetables, then it is shoes. You know, and even sometimes even those sizes, when they say it's the same size, it's not exactly the same size when you fit them and so on. It's such a messy, messy, messy thing. You find this happening when you look at what's his country shares in Latin America, where there is a shortage of goods and services. Just mention. Yes, exactly, right. Where you have, is it Maduro, Hugo Chavez's successor? You see graphic images of empty shelves. That is all as a result of socialism. Socialism of whatever variety, when it is implemented, it results in shortages. It results in poor quality of goods or services if they are available. Thank you. So.
Hello?
Okay, sure.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to close this out here with the last question. So I'm going to challenge you a little bit on this. So you said a couple times that government is the disease and not the cure.
Yes.
So it's a little ironic to me that your talk centers on a government document, right? The title to the property is a government document that says you have the right to this property, and if you don't want certain things done with it, you can get men with guns from the government to come and prevent whatever it is. It's yours to trade with, it's yours to grow things on, whatever it is. So I just want you to talk a little bit about that tension, because without that government enforcement of those property rights, we're back with Hobbes, who you mentioned earlier, in the war of all against all. So is it really that government is the disease, or just a different kind of government can be the cure? And I'll let you answer us out.
I stand by my audacious, critical sort of statement. The government is the disease. However, I will accept it if you were to modify that by saying, well, maybe you should be saying that people have to have a healthy skepticism of government. Now, if you were to say, okay, I can live with that, I would accept that as well. But for me, the point is, I want the government to get the hell out of the way of people's socio-economic endeavors. That's where that's where I stand on this. There are certain functions that the governments can perform, but that means limited government. So it shouldn't be policies that interfere with people's endeavors when they are trying to take care of their destinies. It shouldn't be. Now, when it comes to the title deed itself, now the title deed is in the deeds registrar, which, of course, is a government department. But the point is, it is one of those few neutral, or if not the only neutral, politically neutral, non-intrusive department that I think in some countries, those countries don't come to mind, that are autonomous, are not part of the government, are not an extension of government functions. They are standalone sort of entities that look after this document. And also the important thing to bear in mind is the title deed itself. If there are problems, for example, in terms of the title deed and so on, who it should belong to and so on, where does one take that to? One takes that to the court. Now, in terms of limited government, that should be the independent judiciary, part of the independent judiciary, which would be separate from political interference. And so they would look, like in South Africa, at the property rights clause in the Constitution that the Free Market Foundation had been instrumental in getting incorporated in that Constitution. So they would interpret that and actually relate whatever claims or counterclaims in respect of the title deed. It would be all on the basis of the property right clause that is in the Constitution. That's all I can say. But mark my words. Watch whenever government is involved, especially in the economic arena, and interfering with the economic freedom of people, and interfering with the people's right to choose, interfering with the people's freedom to choose, personal choices, and freedom of exchange, protection of private property. Watch out for all those indicators, and if the government interferes with any of them, that's bad news. It's going to be bad news. Instead, what the government should be doing is to protect the economic freedom of people via its judicial institutions. Thank you.
Have a nice hand. Thank you, Temba. So I welcome you all to join us over at Flames. We'll be heading over there shortly. And thank you all for coming tonight. Look forward to Monday, May 9th for the next provocative lecture.